Marcus had been homeless for nearly 10 years, surviving one day at a time with nothing but determination keeping him alive. One cold morning, while wandering through an abandoned industrial area, he noticed a rusty old truck sitting alone in a dusty lot with a crooked sign hanging from its mirror. The truck looked completely useless, paint peeling, tires flat, and rust covering almost every inch. An old seller stood nearby and said, "This is a junk truck. If you manage to fix it, I won't even take this $195 from you." Marcus didn't know why, but something about those words felt like destiny calling him. With the last money he owned, he bought the truck, never imagining it would soon change his life forever. Hello everyone. Before we start, join our YouTube family by subscribing to the channel. Don't forget to like this video and tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is. Now, let's get into the story. Marcus had spent most of his adult life walking the streets without direction. Every morning began the same way, waking up cold, hungry, and uncertain about where the next meal would come from. He slept under bridges, behind stores, or wherever security guards wouldn't chase him away. Years of struggle had carved deep lines into his face, yet his eyes still carried a quiet resilience. Life had taken almost everything from him, but it hadn't completely taken away his will to keep going. That morning felt different. The sky was pale gray, and a sharp wind moved through the empty warehouses surrounding the industrial district. Broken windows rattled softly, and weeds pushed through cracked concrete, as if nature itself was reclaiming the forgotten place. Marcus walked slowly, hands buried inside his worn coat pockets, trying to stay warm. He wasn't looking for anything in particular, just passing time like he always did. Then he saw the truck again. Up close, it looked even worse. Rust crawled across the metal like a disease. The once green paint had faded into patches of brown and gray. One headlight was cracked, and the windshield carried years of dust and scratches. Anyone else would have walked past it without a second glance, but Marcus stopped. Something about it felt familiar, like looking into a mirror of his own life. Broken, ignored, but not completely finished. The old man selling it watched him carefully. His posture was relaxed, yet his eyes were sharp, almost testing Marcus. "Not many people even stop to look," the man said quietly. Marcus nodded, unsure what to say. Vehicles had always represented freedom. To him, movement, purpose, escape. Owning one felt impossible for someone like him. "This is a junk truck," the seller repeated. "Needs a lot of work, but if you fix it, I won't even take your $195. Marcus frowned slightly. The statement sounded strange, almost like a challenge instead of a sale. Why would someone say that? Was the man joking? Testing him? Or did he see something in Marcus that others didn't? Marcus pulled out the small bundle of cash. He had saved over weeks of collecting scrap metal and doing odd jobs. It was everything he had. Buying the truck meant risking the little security he possessed. Yet deep inside, a quiet voice told him this was more than a random decision. With shaking hands, he gave the money to the old man. The seller handed him the keys without hesitation, smiling faintly as if he already knew something Marcus didn't. "Take care of it," he said simply. Marcus stood there for a moment, keys resting in his palm. They felt heavier than expected, not because of metal, but because of responsibility. For the first time in years, he owned something real. He opened the driver's door, which creaked loudly in protest, and climbed inside. Dust rose into the air as he sat down. The seat was torn, springs poking through the fabric, and the dashboard was cracked from years of sun exposure. Still, to Marcus, it felt perfect. He turned the key. The engine coughed violently, shaking the entire truck. For a moment, he thought it would die. Then suddenly, it roared to life with a deep, rattling sound. Marcus laughed softly in disbelief. It worked barely, but it worked. As he slowly drove out of the lot, the truck groaned with every movement. People on the sidewalk barely noticed him. Yet Marcus felt like he had just taken control of his destiny. The steering wheel vibrated under his hands, and every sound reminded him how fragile the machine was. But instead of fear, he felt hope. He drove through quiet streets, imagining what the truck could become. Maybe he could fix it, little by little. Maybe he could use it for small jobs. Maybe he wouldn't have to sleep outside anymore. The possibilities felt endless compared to the emptiness he had known before. Eventually, Marcus parked in a quiet alley where he planned to spend the night. He stepped out and looked back at the truck, studying every dent and scratch. Under the rust, he sensed history stories hidden beneath layers of neglect. He leaned against the hood and whispered to himself, "We'll fix each other." The words surprised him, but they felt true. The truck wasn't just metal and bolts anymore. It was a second chance. As evening fell, city lights flickered on one by one. Marcus wrapped himself in a blanket beside the truck, feeling strangely peaceful. For the first time in years, tomorrow didn't feel empty. Tomorrow had purpose. And somewhere deep inside, though he didn't yet understand why, Marcus felt certain that buying this broken truck was the beginning of something far bigger than he could. Imagine the next morning. Marcus woke up beside the truck before the sun had fully risen. The cold air bit at his skin, but for once, he didn't feel the usual heaviness of another meaningless day. Instead, he felt purpose. The rusty truck stood in front of him like a challenge waiting to be accepted. He stretched his stiff arms and walked around the vehicle, studying it carefully. In daylight, the damage looked worse than he remembered. Rust covered the doors, the tires were worn thin, and oil stains marked the ground beneath the engine. Anyone else would have called it hopeless. But Marcus had already decided he wasn't giving up on it. He found an old cloth and began wiping dirt from the hood. Dust rose into the air as years of neglect slowly disappeared under his hands. Each movement felt strangely personal, as if he wasn't just cleaning metal, but restoring dignity to something forgotten, just like himself. Hours passed. Marcus checked the engine, despite knowing almost nothing about mechanics. He tightened loose bolts, cleaned away debris, and removed leaves stuck between wires. His hands became black with grease. But he didn't stop. People walked past the alley, some staring curiously at the homeless man working so seriously on a broken truck. By afternoon, exhaustion forced him to sit down. He leaned against the side of the truck, catching his breath. That was when something unusual caught his eye near the fuel tank cap. The metal around it looked slightly different, less rusted, almost as if it had been opened many times long ago. Curious, Marcus stood up. He twisted the fuel cap open. A faint metallic smell escaped, stronger than expected. He grabbed a small flashlight he had, found in the glove compartment, and shined it inside. At first, he saw nothing but darkness. Then, a reflection. Something inside glimmered. Marcus frowned, thinking it was just a piece of metal or trash. Still, curiosity pulled him closer. He reached his hand carefully into the tank opening, stretching his arm as far as possible. His fingers brushed against something solid, a small object wedged deep inside. His heart began to race. Slowly, he pulled it out. It was a small metal box, coated in dust and oil, sealed tightly with rusted clasps. Marcus stared at it in disbelief. Why would a box be hidden inside a fuel tank? His hands trembled as he wiped it clean enough to see its shape clearly. For a long moment, he hesitated. The alley was silent, except for distant traffic sounds. Marcus felt an unexplained nervousness, as if opening the box might change everything. The old seller's words suddenly echoed in his mind. "If you manage to fix it, I won't even take this $195 from you." Taking a deep breath, Marcus opened the clasps. The lid creaked loudly. Inside lay several gold coins wrapped in faded cloth, their surfaces shining even under layers of dust. Marcus froze. He blinked repeatedly, convinced his tired mind was playing tricks on him. Carefully, he picked one up. It was heavy metal, cold against his skin. Beneath the coins rested a worn leather journal tied with a thin string, along with neatly folded documents sealed in plastic to protect them from damage. Marcus's breathing grew faster. He looked around the alley, half expecting someone to appear and claim it was all a mistake. But he was alone, completely alone. He opened the journal. The pages were filled with handwritten entries, sketches, and notes dated decades earlier. The writing belonged to someone educated, thoughtful, someone who had lived a very different life from Marcus. The entries described business deals, travels across states, and personal reflections about trust, loss, and betrayal. One line stood out immediately. "If anything happens to me, everything I built is hidden where only patience will find it." Marcus swallowed hard. He turned more pages, discovering maps, account numbers, and references to investments carefully recorded. Whoever owned this truck had clearly hidden something important and intentionally. His mind struggled to process what he was seeing. Just yesterday, he had been worried about finding food. Now he was holding gold coins and documents that looked incredibly valuable. A mixture of excitement and fear filled him. What if this belonged to someone dangerous? What if taking it was wrong? Yet another thought rose stronger than the rest. Maybe this was meant to be found. Maybe the truck had been waiting for someone who wouldn't give up on it. Marcus sat quietly for several minutes, staring at the box beside him. The sunlight reflected off the coins, sending small flashes of light onto the truck's rusted surface. For the first time, the vehicle didn't look broken anymore, looked mysterious, important. He remembered how everyone else must have ignored this truck for years, seeing only junk. If he hadn't stopped, if he hadn't taken the risk, this hidden secret might have remained lost forever. The realization sent chills down his spine. Marcus carefully closed the journal and placed everything back inside the box. His hands shook, not from cold this time, but from the overwhelming feeling that his life had just shifted onto a completely new path. He looked at the truck and whispered softly, "What were you hiding all these years?" The engine ticked quietly as it cooled, almost like a response. As evening approached, Marcus sat beside the truck again, staring at the small metal box resting on his lap. Questions flooded his mind. Who owned this? Why was it hidden? And most importantly, what would happen next? One thing was certain. Buying this rusty truck had not been an accident, and whatever waited ahead was far bigger than he had ever imagined. Marcus barely slept that night. The small metal box rested beside him in the truck's passenger seat, wrapped carefully inside his blanket as if it were something alive. Every sound in the alley made him open his eyes. His thoughts refused to slow down. Just a day ago, survival had been his only concern. Now, questions filled his mind faster than he could answer them. As morning light entered through the cracked windshield, Marcus sat up and looked again at the box. For several minutes, he simply stared at it, wondering whether opening it again would confirm reality or reveal that everything had been a dream. Slowly, he untied the cloth and lifted the lid once more. The gold coins shimmered in the sunlight, undeniable proof that what he had found was real. He picked one up and studied its markings carefully. The coin looked old, far older than anything he had ever held before. Beneath the coins lay the leather journal and sealed documents, waiting patiently to reveal their secrets. Marcus opened the journal again, this time reading more carefully. The entries told the story of a man named Edward Halpern, a successful entrepreneur who had built several transportation businesses decades earlier. Page after page described ambition, risk, and success, but also fear. Edward wrote about people trying to take control of his company and his growing distrust of those around him. One passage made Marcus stop breathing for a moment. "I hid everything inside the one thing no one would ever value again. Only someone who believes in broken things will find it." Marcus leaned back slowly, letting those words sink in. The truck, the forgotten vehicle everyone ignored. It had been chosen intentionally as a hiding place. He continued reading. The documents included ownership records, investment accounts, and legal instructions explaining how the assets could be claimed by whoever discovered them legitimately. Edward had apparently disappeared shortly after writing the final entries, and his fortune had never been recovered. Marcus's hands trembled as realization dawned on him. This wasn't just hidden money. It was a life-changing inheritance, waiting decades to be discovered. For a long time, Marcus sat silently inside the truck, overwhelmed. Memories of cold nights, hunger, and loneliness flooded his mind. He remembered being invisible to the world, ignored by people rushing past him every day. And now, somehow, fate had placed opportunity directly into his hands. But along with excitement came fear. What if he made the wrong decision? What if he lost everything again? He closed his eyes and took a deep breath. For years, survival had taught him patience. Instead of rushing, he decided to do things carefully. He gathered the documents, placed them back into the box, and secured it safely beneath the seat. The first stop was a small library downtown. Marcus spent hours researching Edward Halpern using public computers. Old news articles confirmed the story. A wealthy businessman who had vanished mysteriously, leaving investigators confused and his fortune missing. Authorities had assumed the assets were lost forever. Marcus stared at the screen, heart pounding. Lost forever. Until now. Over the following weeks, Marcus contacted a legal aid office that helped people without financial resources. At first, the lawyers were skeptical. A homeless man claiming to have discovered a hidden fortune sounded unbelievable. But when Marcus presented the documents and coins, their expressions changed instantly. Everything checked out. The accounts were real, the instructions were valid, and legally, Marquez, the finder of the hidden assets, had the right to claim them. The day the confirmation arrived, Marcus sat quietly outside the office building, unable to move. Cars passed, people hurried by, and the city buzzed with life, just as it always had. Yet for Marcus, the world felt completely different. Tears filled his eyes, not because of money, but because for the first time in years, he felt seen by life itself, if all the suffering had led him to this exact moment. Months later, Marcus stood beside the same truck, now fully restored. The rust had been removed, replaced with shining green paint that reflected sunlight beautifully. The engine ran smoothly, and the interior had been rebuilt with care. But despite everything he had gained, Marcus refused to forget where he came from. Instead of leaving the past behind, he used part of the fortune to open a small workshop that repaired old vehicles and offered jobs to people struggling to rebuild their lives. He knew what it meant to be overlooked, and he wanted others to have the same second chance he had been given. The truck remained parked at the front of the workshop, not as a symbol of wealth, but as a reminder that value is not always visible, a reminder that broken things still carry stories, and a reminder that sometimes life changes not because of luck, but because someone chooses to believe in what everyone else has given up on. One evening, as the sun began to set, Marcus sat in the driver's seat once more. He ran his hand across the steering wheel and smiled softly. The rusty truck that everyone called junk had given him more than money. It had given him purpose, dignity, and a future. As the engine started smoothly beneath him, Marcus whispered quietly, "You didn't just change my life, you gave it back." And with that, he drove forward, no longer searching for hope, but carrying it with him wherever the road would lead.